Welcome to the Red Sneaker Podcast, your guide to success in the worlds of writing and publishing. Now, here's your host, best-selling author and founder of the Red Sneaker Writers Center, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. This is episode 9, going out on December 31st, 2018, the last day of the calendar year. This podcast is for Red Sneaker writers, people who are serious about building or maintaining a writing career and want practical knowledge and advice to help them do it. On this special New Year's Eve edition, I'm interviewing one of the best writers I know, James Scott Bell, famous for his best-selling thrillers like Romeo's Rules, and also famous as a teacher and writing instructor with books like the #1 bestseller, Plot and Structure. I'll be talking to him about both thrillers and writing. But first, the news. This news roundup may be shorter than some because, as I mentioned last time, this is the time of year when things tend to get quiet in New York and really throughout the book and publishing world. Still a few things worth noting, though, starting at Amazon with KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, the avenue that many of you are using to produce your eBooks. And of course, they, in effect, merged with CreateSpace earlier this year to produce KDP Print, which also can produce your print editions on a print-on-demand basis. But this news has to do with KDP and eBooks. They've added 2 new features that they didn't have in the past, or at least not as well. The first has to do with image formatting. As you know, if you've ever tried to do it, trying to incorporate graphics, images, charts, photographs, whatever, in your edition can be extremely complicated for ebooks because there's no standard ebook format. How the ebook looks on a page will depend upon the tablet or device or phone people are using to read it, or the size of print that they've chosen. Makes image formatting complicated. But KDP has integrated some new image handling features that look to me like they're going to make that much easier. It's worth checking them out. They've also added a new table of contents feature, something that will automatically generate a table of contents for your ebook, which is nice because in most cases they require your ebook to have a table of contents. Well, now, assuming your manuscript is formatted correctly, they'll generate it automatically. You need to have chapter headings formatted, centered, but now they'll pick up on that and can generate a table of contents for you, which is very nice. An even bigger story in the news just this past week has had to do with an industry-wide book shortage at exactly the wrong time, the Christmas season, exactly when most people are selling most books. The New York publishers and some others have had trouble producing books in the quantity that bookstores wanted them. I would like to say that this is because book sales are skyrocketing, but it's really not. It's because there's a printing and paper shortage, a lot of problems in the production chain. It's been building for several months. It's a result of shrinking and consolidation in the industry, which I've talked about on previous podcasts, but particularly amongst those companies that are printing books. One of the major printers collapsed this past summer, and the industry is trying to recover from that. There have also been global paper shortages, tightening job market that has made it more complicated for people to hire seasonal workers, and the end result is a lot of bestsellers have appeared in your bookstore in correct quantities, but some books that are breakout hits, getting great reviews, people went looking for and couldn't find. We also have to say, I think in fairness, and here I'm borrowing from the New York Times article of Christmas Eve, publishers and retailers are becoming more risk-averse. You can see why. It's because sales are diminishing. Publishers are printing smaller first runs than they used to, for a good reason, because bookstores aren't ordering the same quantity that they used to. It's impossible to predict the future. You make the wrong bet, you buy too much of something, you're stuck with unsold inventory. You order too little of something, and you end up with customers who can't get the latest copy of some breakout novel that they read about in the newspaper, and that has unfortunately derailed a lot of holiday book sales, which kind of leads me into a brief year-end report. I've seen some memes on Facebook and elsewhere. People keep copying and posting and retweeting or whatever, all these statements about what happened in the book world this year, some of which are true, some of which are a little bit true, and some of which are completely false. For instance, I've repeatedly seen one that said, sales of print books are up. Well, no, they're not, unless you look exclusively at the major publishers industry. If you're looking at the big five, yeah, print books are up, and we've talked about why in previous podcasts. It's because they're deliberately pricing ebooks high, in many cases higher than the print edition, even the hardcover edition. My wife and I were looking for a book just last month. We were going to order it, and we saw the ebook was more expensive than the paper edition. We just said, forget it. Anyway, this is pricing that's obviously designed to increase print sales. So in that venue, yeah, print sales are up. But if you include Amazon, which sells more than 50% of all books in the United States, it's no longer true. Here's something nice that is true. Sales at independent bookstores are in fact increasing. It's not nearly as large as what I've seen in some of those Facebook memes, but it is increasing somewhat, just as the number of independent bookstores is increasing. And of course, we're all hopeful that that will continue in the future. Whether it does or not, ultimately, is probably going to depend upon what happens with Barnes & Noble. As we've talked about, again, in previous podcasts, they're likely to either fold or get bought, and depending upon which it is, that obviously is going to affect independent bookstores. One last thing I've read people saying that book sales are up. Hey, guess what? That's actually true. Book sales are up over last year. But to be fair, last year was pretty poor, relatively speaking. And what's driving the book sales this year, as I mentioned last time, is nonfiction. All those political nonfiction books, many of them Trump bashing, have really boosted sales numbers with the big publishers. For that matter, Bob Woodward's book Fear, all by itself, has racked up 2 million copies, and Michelle Obama's book Becoming is at this point at 3.8, I think, close to 4 million copies. That's what is driving the print numbers up. That's what's driving book sales up. Whether that will continue in years to come, if there aren't any breakout political nonfiction books, that's hard to say. Here's two things that I haven't seen anybody online mention that are true and that I want to make part of my year-end report. Number one, people reading poetry more. That's gone up. That's gone up dramatically. As you may know, the best-selling book in 2017 was the book The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur, who developed her following on social media, primarily on Instagram. There is a whole range of so-called Insta poets now that are making poetry more popular than it's been for years, even decades. Some people say more popular than it's ever been before. That's not necessarily reflected in Barnes & Noble sales or even at universities, but poetry is doing very well right now. Here's one more statistic I want to give you, and this one comes right out of Amazon's annual report. In the previous calendar year, more than 1,000 authors publishing through KDP, in other words, self-published authors, more than 1,000 of them made over $100,000 off book sales. So next time you hear someone saying self-publishing is a dead end, nobody ever makes any money, I want you to remember, well, there are at least 1,000 who are making some real money. I wish it were larger, but how many traditionally published authors are making more than $100,000 a year? Way fewer. If you believe the statistics offered at the author earning website, it's a 3-digit number or less, certainly not a 4-digit number. So I find that encouraging because I'm all about the authors. And when authors are making more money, when authors have more opportunities to get their work in front of readers, that's what makes a good year for me. So I'm leaving you with that. Happy New Year. I recently had the opportunity to interview James Scott Bell for this podcast. He's award-winning, best-selling author, both a novelist and the author of several books on writing, which, even though they don't have red sneakers on them, I think they're terrific because he offers the same kind of useful, practical, down-to-earth advice that I try and offer people in my books. He's written thrillers. He's got the Mike Romeo thriller series, which I think is terrific. You'll hear me talking about that during the interview. He's written the Ty Buchanan legal thriller series, bunch of standalone books, but perhaps most pertinently for this podcast, he's written many books on writing itself, including a #1 bestseller, Plot and Structure. He's got books on how to make a living as a writer, how to write pulp fiction, and many others with practical, useful, red sneaker kind of advice. Here's what he had to say. Jim, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Okay, standard first question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who aspires to write, what would it be?
I would say write. Here's what I mean by that. I think the most important thing a writer does is produce the words and learn every time that they do that by, studying the craft, getting feedback, and so on. But you can't get any of that unless you've produced the actual words. So one of the first pieces of advice I ever got early on, and I'm glad I did, was to write to a quota. Not to a time quota where I say I'm going to sit down for a couple hours and try to write. No, I want a certain number of words written in every session. So I started aiming for 1,000 words a day. And after a while, I decided to go for a weekly quota because I knew that, some days I wouldn't be able to write and I could make it up on other days and so on. So for the last 20 years, I would say, I know exactly how many words I've written per day, per week, and per year, keeping track on a spreadsheet. And that really, to me, is the big secret of, how I've been able to publish as many books as I have, is just that steady production of writing. So just to give a little more detail on this, I tell people, try to figure out, no matter what your schedule is, how many words per week you could comfortably produce, and then up that by 10%, because I think you need a little bit of upward pressure to try to make a quota like that. So you can find your own zone, and then if you stick to it, and then revise it as your schedule changes, but you stick to it, day after week, after month, after year, you're going to do very well in terms of producing and learning the craft.
So does that mean that if you hit your weekly total quota in 2 days in a mad, florid burst of writing, you can goof off for the rest of the week?
If you want to loaf, yes, that's certainly an option. But what I always do is I put, I try to credit my account. So I'll keep going. What I try to do is write about 6,000 words a week and cut, shape that into 1,000 words 6 days a week. But if I've had a really good week, I build that up because I know that there are some times, when I'm traveling, for example, or if I happen to hit the sick bed or something, that will be there for me. It's just my way of keeping up the production. So yeah, every now and then, though, there'll be a day or two when I will loaf and catch up on my reading, but that's all good.
I recall reading in one of your books, I think it's How to Make a Living as a Writer, something about giving yourself a day off. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, I write 6 days a week. I always try to take a day off, usually Sunday, just to, rest the gears. And I find that when I get back to writing on Monday, I'm really more energized. So it's, I call it a writing Sabbath. And for me, it makes a lot of sense. And it's worked for other writers, too.
I think it's a terrific idea. That you've written many books on writing, obviously, but that one, How to Make a Living as a Writer, I thought, even reading it after having written and published many